it's just, and I thought of you because you've written so much about the Stones. You have a great love of the Stones, and I mean, what were your first feelings when you heard the news?
I was just on the other end of an interview call. I was interviewing a guitar player that had played with Leon Russell, and sort of in the later days, and I was getting all these texts, and I was slightly distracted because I hadn't heard the news that was all happening. And I mean, I had heard about we had braced ourselves before, and then we had braced ourselves again recently with the news that he wasn't going to be on the road, and that usually indicates something quite serious. So yeah, it was, and I had to break the news to this guitar player who's obviously a fan as well. So it's kind of like I try to avoid the cliches, but it really is like somebody's stepping. Let's say that's one way to avoid it. Like instead of punching me in the gut, it's more somebody stepping on my stomach. Like this weight of like dread of like it's just immortality. Where the guy who led an amazing life. I mean, who the hell thought Keith would be outlasting everybody? But that's the other cliche. But it's true. Yeah. It's just like we're all getting up there, man. I'm 55. I'm no spring chicken, but it's like you just know that this stuff is coming. But when it comes, it hits you really hard.
And I think that's maybe why I'm feeling that way, because for my whole life, I've heard their music and I've loved them so much, and this is like a serious reminder that there is a final destination here. There is an end, and
and there's something about, in particular, rock stars, right? I mean, we're the generation that you and me that we're the first generation where it grew up with rock music as a given. Rock and roll predates us. And for you and I, big music fans, it was about going back and finding, I think the first record of the Stones I remember buying contemporaneously may have been Some Girls. Anyway, what I was going to say is that there's something about rock stars that were the ones that lasted, because so many of them were dying young at 27, seemingly. And so for the ones that lasted, I mean, the Stones were like the most emblematic survivors of all of this. And so for them to make it, and then for artists, I mean, I think artists, not just the celebrity, not just the rock star, but artists, you feel that somehow, maybe unconsciously, you feel like maybe these somehow transcend the normal mortal coil.
Right, yeah. There's some magic there, right? There's a magic that's involved, and so for someone like that, like Charlie Watts or David Bowie or Prince, people who I think were aliens who were actually called back to their planet. They were so, it just for some reason hurts more. Maybe it's the emotion. It's the emotional attachment to the music. Maybe
you can't think of somebody at that level of rock star elites that was less of a rock star and more anti-rock star in a lot of ways than Charlie. This elegant, unassuming. I mean, he had no time for all the bullshit of it all. So, but there's something still about his being up there, and in his unassumption, in his elegance, in his anti-rock stardom, it made him that much more lovable,
Yeah, because I think there was the contrast between, he was the anti-Mick and the anti-Keith. So I think it was the contrast. So Mick was doing his thing and being the international playboy and, hanging out with the elite, and Keith was the junkie rock god and anti-establishment. But then you have Charlie, who was...
I mean, for a guy like me who I'm just going off on what you're saying. I mean, for me, to be in a rock band all these years, looking like I do, and having met my wife before I left college,
right.
Before I ever went out on my first rock and roll tour, to look at him going home to this family life whenever he could, the same wife for all those years since they were kids. It's an other example of you don't have to go down the Axl Rose
right
slot to the Izzy Stradlin. You don't have to imitate Keith Richards. You can imitate Charlie Watts and instead. Yeah. It's sort of like the other example.
I think I loved him. I don't know if he didn't fall for it. He didn't buy all the BS that came with being in the biggest rock band in the world.
Beyond not buying it, he seemed terminally bemused by it.
Yes.
Like his wide frog mouth, just sort of always in a like, let the boys be the boys. I can't believe this is still going on.
Right. Yeah.
Later,
Right. Yeah. Because he was.
I just think he was. There was a zen to him somehow.
Because he was a jazz guy, but
correct.
And then he joined up. He always referred to it as this is my job. It's like, I gotta show up and play for a stadium full of people. That's my job. It's like, and it's like, Mick and Keith are out there and they're doing their thing, and he's just back there. He's like what a drummer should be. And I'm not talking about his playing. It was kind of like that was his whole being, because he was the most consistent in the band.
Yeah.
Just by who he was. And you want that in a drummer, right? As someone who's in a band, you want your drummer to be consistent. You want them to keep time. You want them to be the anchor. You know what I mean?
But it extends from his personality and groundedness to his playing, which was grounded as well and unflashy. I just remember being a kid, in the Neil Peart days, and this is nothing to take away from Neil Peart, but just, in the 70s, as the late 70s sort of became ridiculous with drumming and guitar playing, for that matter, it's like I was sort of made fun of by some of these other musician kids that were like, oh, geez, the Stones. I mean, these guys can't play. And I'm like, what are we talking about?
Yeah.
I mean, just because he doesn't have a 40-minute drum solo where the band leaves the stage and goes back to the groupies and then comes back out and he's still playing, it's like, I love John Bonham and I love some flashy drummers. I was glad as I got older to see people around me mature enough to understand that there is a pocket there, man. Listen to that. Listen to Al Jackson Jr. Listen to Roger Hawkins. Listen to these guys from 1965 laying down this sort of solid thing. And that's the school that Charlie came from. It's the less is more.
Yeah, and it's not easy. People, the people talk about Charlie and they talk about Ringo Starr the same way. Like, they're not drummers. They don't do anything. Yeah, they don't do anything because they're keeping time perfectly. And people don't understand. And I'm not a drummer, but, I've been in bands and I know drummers. And it's like, it's one of the hardest things to do is maintain perfect meter for, let's say, 3.5 minutes. Try that.
It's beyond that. It's like it's the reason that the drummers are always they're the sort of first to go under the microscope in a studio, and those guys, it's the moment where they can all wither from that pressure.
Right.
It's like, if you don't have a good drummer, I mean, Keith knew it earliest. It's like Keith says in his book, we had to get this guy. Right. We had to get Charlie, just like the Beatles had to get Ringo. Yeah. They knew this is the foundation. Any musician that has played more than amateur garage stuff. Even those guys, that it comes down to the drummer first. It's like, you're Rush and you're all over the place. But if you can find a guy that not only keeps time, but knows how to play within that time, to swing,
right,
to find that groove. I mean, there's no band that had more of that understanding of what a groove is than the Stones.
Right. Now, you mentioned, Keith saying we have to get this drummer. And I don't know if it was in his book or maybe I've read a bunch of books, including yours. I'm not sure. He said something to the effect of, there's no Rolling Stones without Charlie Watts. Yeah. Basically. And I know they were going to go out on the road with Steve Jordan, who's a great drummer. But so what do you think this means? As someone who knows a lot about the band, you've written books on them, what do you think this means for Mick and Keith at this point?
Yeah, I don't. People think people say ridiculous things like they're still in it for the money or whatever. It's like, these guys, they're paid for 100 generations of their family. This is not about the money. It's about who they are and passion, their vocation. It's part of who they are. They can't, it's part of what's kept them alive all these years is this love of music. It's certainly what kept them on the younger side for their age in many ways. These guys are my dad's age, and it's hard for me to say that, to believe that sometimes. So what are they going to do? I don't really begrudge them one way or the other. I mean, I got to say, when Bill Wyman left the band, and I write about this in my books, I didn't think I guess what I'm saying is I was really surprised at what a big musical difference it made. And in hindsight, I shouldn't have been surprised because you can't break up the greatest rhythm section, let's say the greatest extant rhythm section at that point, because there's been some amazing ones all throughout history, especially those soul guys and the Wrecking Crew guys, whatever else. But let's stick with like the groups, the Funk Brothers at Motown, the Muscle Shoals Swampers, the Beatles and Stones, the Booker T and the MGs guys at Stax. I mean, these are there's so few of them that you could literally count them on one hand. And so when Bill left the group, a fantastic bass player took his place. But it's just, and I don't mean it's just not the same. Like, oh, it's just not the same. Bill's not up there. I mean, it's literally not the same. It's
right.
that push and pull, that swing that Bill somehow found in between Keith and Charlie. There was something not magical because that's an overused word. It's just experience. It's generation. It's like decades of experience of playing together, and it's chemistry. And there's something very real about that. When you get into somebody else's rhythm. Listen, I know this firsthand. It's like you can go play with other people, but you come back to that home band, and man, it just feels like that old comfortable shoe because it is. It's like you guys know you've grown up together, and it's like finishing your wife's sentences or vice versa. There's a certain familiarity to it that is perfect for what a band is, and there's so few bands that last. So I don't know. I just don't think that I just can't imagine the band with another drummer. I just literally can't. It's like you can't change out the essential cog like that and have it be the same.
You've written about the Stones. How many books have you written about the Stones? It's been 3?
2.
2?
Yeah, one called Exile on Main Street that's just about exile on Main Street. Right,
yeah, that one.
And Rocks Off, 50 tracks that tell.
Okay, all right. So of all the research you've done, what is maybe a favorite Charlie story that you came across? It may be true or it may be legend, that's fine, but something that you thought, that this is like the greatest thing ever.
Oh, in terms of stories, I mean, the famous one that just jumps to my mind immediately is Mick being drunk, and this is probably in the 80s when they were really kind of at their lowest ebb personally and otherwise. And they were having like a sort of a summit or whatever. And Mick was, and then, now you have to take this with a grain of salt because this is all from my memory, and this is all filtered through Keith Richards, who tells it in his book, I think.
Yeah.
about Mick Jagger getting a little too drunk and saying something about my drummer. He calls up Charlie Watts' hotel room and says, "Yeah, well, where's my drummer? I want my drummer up here." And Charlie was in bed. But he this is where it gets a little apocryphal, I think. I think he says, he puts on a suit or something, gets dressed in his impeccable style because he was always style horse. Comes up to the room, knocks on the door. Mick opens the door and just knocks him flat and says, "I'm not your bloody drummer."
Right, yeah. I remember that. From Life, from Keith's book, and he was like, he even put cologne on. Keith said you could smell the cologne. He was just ready.
I'm sure this got added to.
Right, and it was like 4:30 in the morning or something, which was and like Mick. Now Keith said he punched Mick so hard he slid on a table and almost fell out a window into one of the canals in Amsterdam. That may be a Keith Richards embellishment, but you know what? Getting in your Savile Row suit and putting on the bow tie and shaving and everything, that's something I tend to believe about.
I think that's all Keith's embellishment. I think Charlie probably composed himself, thought about it, walked up to the room dressed. But can you picture him actually putting on a suit and cologne and shaving for this? I doubt it.
I don't know. I don't know, Bill. This is Charlie
We want to
Watts,
believe it.
He did everything with class and professionalism, so, I don't know. I'd love to, I'm going to believe that. I'm going to choose to believe
me too.
that.
I choose to believe all the good myths as well.
Yeah. All right. Well,
let me just leave you with this. I just excerpted my book on my website because this is, if you want to hear Charlie's importance to the band and Charlie with Bill and how they arranged music and what makes them the Stones, I can think of no better example than Wild Horses. where you listen to Charlie's points of entry and exit of the song. Like most drummers would maybe wait for an intro and then come in, but just the way that Charlie fits himself in there and then drops out and then comes back in. There's some amazing work in there. Very simple, but it builds. Each little part of the arrangement builds, and Charlie almost arranges that song himself. I point to that as my example.
That's Charlie Watts, right there.
Exactly.
Doing it for the song. Well, that's fantastic. Yep. Just to add to the Amsterdam story, I'm sure you've seen the documentary 25 by 5.
Yeah, that's another good story.
So the very end of that film, they do the credits and everything, and then they go to Charlie, and the guy's like, "You've been in the band for a long time," and Charlie says, "Yes, it's very hard work." He goes, "Well, not so much today. We've done absolutely nothing here." And the guy says, "You've probably done a lot of waiting around being in the Rolling Stones for 25 years. He says, "Yeah, 5 years of actually playing and 20 years of waiting around."
Exactly.
Right?
That's rock and roll right there, man.
That's right, man. That's right. So, hey, Bill, thank you so much, man. I appreciate your time and your insights. And, I suggest people go and read your books, Rocks Off, and then the 33 1/3 series book on Exile on Main Street, which is also excellent and still my favorite album from those guys. So,
well, I appreciate being thought of for this. It's an honor for me to talk about my musical hero like this. And rest in peace, Charlie. It's I'm all choked up thinking about it. But I mean, I really think of Keith and Mick and his family, and it's gonna hit them hard.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it, Bill.
Thanks, Mike.